Hey everybody, we're here live today for another live Q&A with Kobo Writing Live. Really happy to be joined with Kate Tilton this week, or this month even. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Let us know where you're coming from, tuning in from in the comments. Always really nice to see where people are coming from. It is nice and rainy here in Toronto today, but slowly getting into spring. We have Kathy, I am not going to be able to pronounce that, and she already has a joke. I don't know, Laura, if you want to take the joke.
Sure. Why was Cinderella so bad at soccer? She kept running away from the ball.
Amazing. I love it.
That's so good.
Starting off on a
That's
high.
great.
We're starting off in a great way. Caitlin's coming in from Connecticut. Richard's here as well. Thanks, guys, for joining us. So we'll get started. And if you have any questions, you can drop them into the chat throughout, and I'll try and pull them up as they're coming through. But if not, we'll get the conversation going with Kate here. So I'm going to give you a quick intro, Kate. You are the founder of Kate Tilton's Author Services LLC, where you've been helping authors since 2010. Kate works with authors of all stripes, from New York Times and USA Today bestselling and award-winning authors to pre-publication. And you're really focused on helping authors navigate the publishing world and connecting with readers. Does that sound about right?
It is. It is my absolute joy to work with authors. I've been doing it since high school for me.
Wow.
And yeah, it's been a long time. It'll be 13 years this year. And I love it. Like, reading was a huge thing for me. As a kid, I had this period of time where there was no kids my age where I lived. So reading books was how I was had friends. And then I finally moved, I lived in the middle of nowhere. And now I live in Georgia, and there was a lot of different author events and, just things you can go do and get to meet authors. So it's been a joy to be able to do this work.
Nice. So my first question was going to be about just telling us about you and how you got started working with authors. So it began by you being a reader first and then kind of working with authors from there. How did you make the
Yeah.
decision to sort of make that your career?
I would say it was less a decision and more that I fell into it. Like I mentioned, I was in high school. So I happened to be on Twitter at the time. Twitter was a pretty great platform back then. And one of my favorite authors posted they were looking for an assistant. And as the teenager I was like, oh, could I do that virtually? And they hired me for the job. And I think part of that was because they had actually met me in person. So that was kind of the benefit of living in Georgia where I do, was I was able to go and meet them. So I got hired for that job. I was handling their email, and at the time they had a form on their website. So I was getting rid of the spam and accepting new people. So there's stuff I was naturally good at. And then from there, I kind of, I'd meet authors at events. I happened to go to one with a traditionally published author, and then after, she invited a bunch of us out to go to dinner. And I happened to sit next to an author who is self-publishing. So then we got to talking, and she was like, oh, you do all of these things? And I was like, yeah. And she offered me a job. So it kind of ballooned from there. Joel Freelander, who's no longer with us, he used to run a website, and he had me do an article about author assistants. That was back in 2013, and that's when things really took off for me. So I was kind of like, well, I could just keep doing this and see how it goes, or try to get another job somewhere. And I decided I'd much rather give this a shot.
Nice. I love that you came into it as a fan, just following an author. Something that I find whenever we're kind of chatting to authors, they're always so approachable and so kind of willing to talk and help fans and things. And I know there's that sort of old saying about don't meet your heroes, but you must have had were you sort of not starstruck, but were you kind of oh my God, I'm working for this author?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that was back when their publisher had done a bunch of swag. So I bought my money from the job went to me then buying swag from the author.
Nice. So
It was a huge
your
thing.
meetings, you're just like, yeah, got the hat, got the shirt.
Yeah, yeah, like little tote bag, which was perfect for carrying books. And then like other fans would recognize it and stop me and be like, oh, and I was like, yes, yes, I am. Let's talk about the books.
The power of swag. It works, man.
Yeah, good swag. Good swag is super important.
Has the star power kind of worn off over time, or do you still get kind of starstruck with certain authors that you meet?
I think I still like, I don't know if I get like starstruck,
Yeah.
but also it's like because I know they're people, but I'm
Mhm.
also still like super excited to meet them.
Yeah.
So I think like maybe less awkward. Like the first time I met an author was actually in that middle of nowhere town. So it was a huge deal that this author was coming to our school. So like we had to read all the books. We decorated the entire library. Like for months, we were prepping for this author event. So like there's a picture of me as like a little preteen awkwardly like handing him my book for him to sign. So I think I'm a little bit better than that now, like a little bit more comfortable, but I'm still always like super excited to meet my favorite authors.
Yeah.
And
We're
I
all
will
still
also
readers at
multiple
heart.
hmm Yeah.
You mentioned when you first started, it was kind of helping authors with like their website forums and getting everything set up there. So can you tell us a little bit about what you primarily help authors with, and do those offerings kind of change per author, or is it kind of the same for everyone?
So I would say it definitely changes depending on what the author needs. And then it's changed over time too. Like when I started, I was managing email, which was sorting, right? It was like, this needs to go to the publisher. This is hate mail. I'm going to delete that. This is fan mail. I'm going to put that in a folder for her. Um, and now I do a lot more stuff, right? Like there was a time when I didn't know how to upload to Kobo Writing Life. And like now I do that all the time. I've done that for years. So there's that kind of stuff. Like now I do a lot of uploading of books, formatting in Vellum, but also working with like trying to find other avenues for authors that are not just publishing ebooks and print books. So looking into audiobooks and even other avenues, like other smaller platforms that most people aren't on. Um, and then things like direct sales is a huge thing this year, and Kickstarter is another one that's like picking up. But that's another thing, like trends have changed. So like a couple years ago, it was Instagram was a huge thing. Now it's TikTok. When I first started, book tours were the huge thing, online virtual book tours, and like now you don't see as many of those happening. So yeah, it changes. It changes a lot depending on the author and what they need.
That must be fun, but also a little bit daunting for you to have to learn how to do all of these new things, you know? How do you how do you handle that?
I love to learn new things when I can use them. So like Shopify was a new one for me this year. So the start of the year was just like, okay, I need to learn all the things. um, I don't know that it was like stressful. Like it kept me really busy. So like most days I'd be like, okay, I know I'm going to spend, 7 hours working on this. But there's also a lot of resources out there to be able to learn things. Um, yeah, I don't know. I enjoy it. I enjoy being able to learn, and that's probably why I like doing what I do and working with different authors. So working with people that are just getting into publishing versus people who've been publishing for a long time. I have authors that make $500,000, and then I have authors who are just publishing their first book. It's very different, but that's what makes it exciting for me.
Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't feel like work either as well when you're doing this sort of stuff, especially the research piece. I always enjoy that myself as well.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. So because you have like authors with like different levels and things like that, so what does an average work day look for you? Like how do you split up your time, or is every day different?
It really is that every day is different. Um, so like I have a couple of clients who I work a lot more hours for. Those are like my assistant clients. And lately I've been trying to break those into certain days, like make sure I'm always checking their stuff on Wednesdays and this person on Thursdays and this person on Tuesday. Um, but then I also have the consultation. So those are like the newer authors that are coming to me, and those they put in whenever they want on my calendar. So I do have like work hours that they can schedule. So like some days, like yesterday, I had only one meeting. Some days I'll be meeting all day. It depends, which is also part of why I enjoy what I do, is that it's not the same thing every single day.
You must have
it's
an
very different.
excellent color-coded calendar, I'd imagine. Like you must be on top of everything.
Yeah, I have different ways of managing it, and like it's changed over the years. Right now, I'm very big fan of just keeping a paper calendar in front of me, and then I
Oh.
put off my off days in yellow, and then just put how many hours I need to work to get my hours done for that month. And that keeps me on top of things, but that's also just like leaning into my strengths.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And what do you like best about working so closely with indie authors?
I love the, like, being able to learn different things, but I also love getting to help them so they're not so stressed.
Mm.
Like, it's really encouraging to me when they say, like, "Oh my gosh, I couldn't do this without you," or like, "Thank God I was so, like, overwhelmed, and you were just able to, like, come in and sort that all, and now I can focus." Um, I like to read books. Like, I want authors to be writing books, and it's hard to do that, when you're running a six-figure, seven-figure business. You start getting to the point where, like, you really do need to, like, outsource in order to still have time to write.
Mm-hmm.
So I love to be able to be that person, because I'm not like a writer by heart. Like, it's not something I really want to do. But I love the business side of things. So I love being able to do that, and then have the authors who love it and that's their passion do the writing. So
Yeah.
that way I can then read the books.
I know you're a fan. That's the same as me. I feel like I have no
Yeah.
creative skills, but I admire it thoroughly.
Yeah.
Richard is asking, have your hours increased over the years? I have to presume they have, as you've sort of grown your business here.
Yeah, I would say, because obviously when I started, I was in high school. So
Right.
I was doing very little. And then they've increased. And then I would say, like, they have decreased a little bit over time, but that's also because I'm charging more money and doing more focused work. Um, but yeah, it's good. I keep a pretty full schedule. So like right now, I don't take on new assistant type clients, like the people I'm working 30, 40 hours a month for. But I do take on consultations. So I might be a little bit more busy one month than another month.
Exactly. Sounds good. Well, there's a question from Douglas here. I'm going to pop up. Laura, is that okay? I'm going off script with this. Am I disturbing anything? But
You're okay. Go ahead.
all right. Douglas is asking, what work tasks can an assistant help an author take off their plate? Which I think is a great question. So, like, if you're an author and you're feeling overwhelmed and you don't know where to begin, like, what's something that is not an easy, but like something that's very common that people kind of outsource to an assistant?
Yeah. So I could just give you like a list of tasks, but I think
Sure.
the most important thing for an author to do is to take stock of what they're doing for their business. So to actually write down all the things you're doing, and maybe also write down a list of things that you're not doing, but you really want to do.
Oh, yeah.
And then first consider, like, should you be doing that? I'm a big fan of quitting things that are not serving, your career. Because I have a lot of authors who will come and say, like, well, I need someone to do my social media. And I'm like, but do you actually need to be doing social media? Like, is that actually helping where you are right now? And it's not to say that social media can't be helpful. Uh, but usually for people that social media is really helpful for, it's those who are naturally really good at it, and enjoy it, and not people who are like, well, I hate social media. I just need someone to go and post for me. So that's the thing at first. It's like to go in and actually look at, like, do you really want that to be part of your, I guess, platform and like what you do? And then look at things like, sometimes it's about things that you're not really great at. So like I do a lot with newsletters. So the author will give me the writing piece of it, but then I'll go in and like make it look nice and add all the links and the pictures and that kind of stuff. Um, I do a lot with websites where you'll have someone else that will develop the website, but then I'll help the author keep it up. So add new books. If they do a blog, or add the blog posts. So that way the author can focus more on the storytelling aspect of things and like sit down and just write. And then I take that and do the scheduling part. Um, I've helped authors with the organizing aspect of things. I find a lot of authors when they start out with me, they're like, I don't know where any of my files are, or I know where these files are, but the book from 5 years ago, I don't know. So it's a lot of me then like taking that and being like, okay, let's actually make this into systems. I think a lot of times, if you're not coming in the author like career from more of a corporate background, right, or like a business background, it can be like, I don't know how to treat this like a job. So I love to be able to go in there and be like, that's okay, we'll do it together. I've helped authors with rebranding, so changing all of the covers and changing the series titles to make it more cohesive. Man, I have a whole list. It goes on and on. I'd say it's easier for me to say the things I don't do, right? Like I personally don't do ads, but I know there are the other author assistants who will do ads. I prefer to do like BookBub and things that are like that, like newsletter ads. But I don't do, BookBub's ad platform or Amazon's ad platform or Facebook's ad platform because I just don't enjoy it.
Do you think when an author is looking at like the tasks that they're trying to like, consider what they can do you think it's worth them like calculating like the time it takes them to do X versus like the time that they're writing? Or should it be really kind of like you were saying, building on the like the strengths of an author? Like maybe you don't want to have social, like even if it's taking like more time than not. How does time factor into these things?
Yeah, because I think there's two factors, because there's the actual physical time that we all have, and then there's also our energy. So to do creative work takes more energy than to do admin work. So like for some authors, sometimes they like to keep a little bit of the admin work to do when they have like an off day. But that's meant to consider. It's like if you really, really struggle to do a newsletter, and that I find is super important to like growing an audience, then that would be a good thing to offsource to someone else. Because, right, it's so draining to you that it's taking away from your writing. So someone can say like, oh, it only takes, an hour to do it. But if that hour is painful for you, right, like that's even more of a sign that that's something you need to get rid of. So I would say try to do both, of looking at like, what am I really just not good at? What can I do, but it's really hard for me to do? And then what maybe is easy for me to do, but it takes so much time that it's actually interrupting. And that might be other things too, besides just your business. Because sometimes what authors need is like they need to hire someone to clean their house once a month, or they need a babysitter for a couple hours.
Do you do that as well?
I don't, but I highly recommend it. I have someone who cleans my house once a month. Mm-hmm. It is the best money I spend. I went from spending every weekend trying to clean this house to she handles it and I pay her. And then I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
So that's another thing too. Like sometimes it's not an assistant you need, it's a babysitter or a house cleaner or, someone just come and organize your stuff so you're not like overwhelmed by the project.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. Sometimes people don't realize what they need until they really get into it with you.
Yeah.
What would you say is one common mistake that you see authors making over and over again, either new authors or experienced ones even?
So keeping it in terms of like hiring people, I would say one of the mistakes I see is like people hiring someone when they don't actually need someone. And there could be a few reasons for that. It can be because they're so overwhelmed. They think just by hiring someone that will take that away. And that can be a problem, right? Because if you just hire anyone and they don't actually know what you need, you'll spend more time trying to teach them how to do the job, and that can cause stress. Or they might hire someone because they think they should. And I'm always big on anytime you say should, you should question that. Like, but should you? And other times people will try to like hire someone on when they're not ready to let go of stuff. In order to be able to work with someone, you need to be able to give them control over their own work. So that might mean that they do things differently than you would do them. And sometimes authors are like, they're just not at that stage, or maybe they're not at that point for a certain thing. So like that's something to also ask yourself is, out of this list that I made, are there things that I'm actually ready to let someone else handle and trust that like they know what they're doing? because yeah, that can be a big pain point.
We definitely see a lot of authors who have trouble kind of relinquishing that control. If you could kind of fill in the sentence, authors don't realize making this change to their routine will help them, like, how would you finish that sentence?
So I would say authors don't realize not checking their phone, email, social media first thing would change their career.
Wow. Their
Wow.
career as a whole, you think?
Yeah. For this is something that I picked up from Becca Syme. But she's found like a lot of authors, when you start your day by distraction, it then leads your whole day to that. So by starting your day by writing first, or for some authors, I'm like, go do your journaling and like go take your walk and then sit down and write. Um, they write better words, they get more done because they're not then distracted. So it sounds like I'm bashing on social media. It's not that I hate social media. It's just one of those things that I feel like authors have been told over and over again, you have to do, have to do, have to do. And the reality is the only thing you really need to do is write books. Everything else is extra. If you're not writing, then no amount of marketing is going to change your career.
Nice. I think that's great advice. So what should authors look for when they're trying to find an assistant to help them? Like, what sort of, is there specific things that they do that could cover? Or like, I mean, I feel like when you Google anything, it's just such a web of things to go for. So is there anything specific they should look for?
Yeah. So I think it's important that you're finding someone who does the things that you're looking to have done. And that's why I really suggest, before you even think about looking for an assistant, doing that review and writing down that list of, here are the things that I would like someone else to handle that I'm comfortable with someone else handling, that would really be worth me paying money to have taken care of for me. And compare that then to who you're looking at. Most people will have it listed, kind of the things that they work on. Um, and the other thing I would say is to be asking authors that you know for recommendations. I think that's always going to be the best bet at finding someone. Um, and the other element of it can be sometimes like people need to do a consultation or like have a coach that will help guide them through situations. So that's also an option when someone's like feeling kind of stuck in the search. Because sometimes it's, again, right, like you don't actually need the assistant, you just need to cut things off your list. So like if you're stuck at that list part, it might be a good idea to talk to someone to help you work through that first. And then other than that, I would say, like, look at their website, make sure that they are not having major typos and like they clearly know what they're talking about. Um, you know, if they have done interviews, like listen to those, because a lot about working with other people is also making sure that your personalities match.
Right.
Like someone might be great at their job, but you might just not understand each other. And this can be like communication styles, like you just don't understand each other well. That wouldn't be a good fit for you. So if you're like listening to what they're saying and you're like, well, I don't agree with that, and I don't agree with that, then like that's not the person you want to hire. Even if they're great and everyone recommends them, right? Just you want to go to someone else. So that's probably the top stuff I would look for.
Nice. And Kimberly has a question here that's a little bit related, but
Mhm.
is there like an average industry rate that authors charge, or is this really dependent on like hours worked and tasks and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah. I wish there was just like an industry average, but there's not, because also it depends on the VA's experience. So, like, since I've been doing this for over 12 years, like, I charge a lot more than someone who's just starting out. And that's also something to look at, right? Is like, if
Right.
what you need help with is just organizing your email, you don't need to be paying me to do that. Like, I certainly can do it, but it's, someone says like paying for a Ferrari when you just need a Corolla. you know so that's the thing. It's like, if you're looking at, okay, like I am making 6 figures and I want to grow to 7 figures, so I need someone who knows way more about the industry and has been doing it for longer, then you're going to want to pay a decent amount of money for that person, so that you don't have to teach them things, right? You can just hand it off and they'll take care of it. Whereas if you have more time and you are willing to help kind of train someone in how you want things done, you can get someone for a lot cheaper, because that's a trade-off, right? You're giving more of your time and energy to help them do the things the way you want them done. So sorry, it's not just a cut and dry answer.
Never is when it comes to money, so that's totally fine. Actually, Mustafa had a question here as well. I just wanted to pop up that would you help researching specific topics for a book? Would that come under your sort of umbrella, or is that more of a research assistant and slightly different?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me personally, that wouldn't be something that I take on, because I think there are people that do research and like that is their bread and butter. So I'd rather you go hire someone like that, like a research assistant, as you mentioned, Tara. But not to say like you can't hire people to help you with that. There are absolutely people that do that. My stuff leans more into like the business marketing side of things. Then, right, if you have editing questions, I'm not your person. I could help you find an editor though.
Yeah, I feel like you could hire someone to do anything, but just, yeah, maybe not
You
all
can.
one person to do everything.
And that's a good point too, is like sometimes it's better not to be looking for someone who can do everything, and to maybe hire two separate people to do different things. Because to expect someone to be perfect at everything is just asking, you're setting yourself up for failure, the person you're hiring for failure. So you really want to look at, okay, like what is their specialty?
Great.
That's a great point. You really want someone who's kind of like an expert in what they're working on so they can bring that to your work.
Yeah. Yeah, especially for larger companies.
Yeah, that's a great point. What would you say is one aspect of the industry that authors should look into more? So, for example, like translations or audio. I know there's a lot of different stuff that's available to authors in the indie world, so it can get a little more overwhelming, but
Yeah. And that also depends too on like where they are in their
yes,
career.
that's a great
So if
point.
you're publishing your first book, you don't want to be looking at audio and translations. You want to be looking at, am I writing the best book I can? So, right, you're focusing more on craft. Now, if you have been publishing for a while, you're making good money publishing just your ebooks, that's where you want to say, okay, like make sure I have print books available. That's where I want to start looking into doing audio. And that's where you might want to start looking at doing translations, because if your books sell, then it's easier to say like I can go into these new avenues. One, because you have the funds from the book sales to then put back into the business, and then also because it's not like my craft is an issue and I need to still work on leveling that up. Yeah.
That's a great point. I think it's good too to have someone on their team like you who's actually honest with people about what they what they need at their point in their career, because I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of times authors get overwhelmed seeing all the options out there and they might like jump into something expensive like audio or translations when it wouldn't really suit them at that time. So that's what
Yeah. And that's what I like to do with authors, because it's a good thing that we have a lot of information out there, but the downside is it can make authors, especially when they're newer, feel like they're expected to do all of these things. And we really have to look at like where it makes sense in your career. So, like I mentioned, BookBub, I'm like, it doesn't make sense to have a BookBub on your first book when you have no other books out. That doesn't mean BookBub is bad. It just means it's not right for that particular moment. I personally don't do ads. It doesn't mean ads aren't helpful. It's just ads are something that, one, I find you want someone who focuses only on ads. And you want to do that when you have a lot more books out and you're already selling, because then the ads will just increase that. But like if you're struggling to sell your book at all, period, doing ads might not help that. Like you might be spending what you're earning in ads. So that might be where we need to look at, like, are you writing are you writing things that are way too genre mismatched, or is your writing just not hitting the market? We need to try something different, like a different genre. Is it your covers that are the issue? Is it the descriptions that are the issue? And sometimes it is just like it's a good book, but the market's not interested at this moment. But if the market's not interested, doing more ads isn't going to make the market interested. You need to move on to something else. And then maybe in the future, the market will shift and then be interested. And that's hard. Like, it's hard to tell authors that. But also, like, if you really love writing and that's your passion, like, that's what I want authors to be focused on. Is not just, well, I have to make 7 figures to be successful, because you don't. It's what's going to make you happy. which is very different for everyone.
That's
Yeah,
so
you just,
true.
oh, sorry. Richard had asked a question about if you ever advise authors to change their genre or style of writing. So you just answered that there for sure.
Yeah.
That it must be you're in like a unique position where you could also see the data behind things of like, say, for instance, like with these ads or BookBubs and stuff as well, and making and using that to advise authors.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a hard place to be because, like, I know how much passion authors put behind their writing. Um, but again, like, so just because something doesn't sell isn't necessarily a sign that it's not good. It can be that the market just isn't interested in it at the moment. And that's why the encouragement is like to then pivot and try something else. So, like, I don't suggest authors write in just a popular genre because it's popular. Like, you have to enjoy the writing you're doing.
Absolutely.
But most authors usually tend to like to write different things. So it could be like, hey, if your werewolf romance isn't selling right now, like, why don't you shift and try that cozy mystery you've been really interested in doing? Because maybe that's where you're going to resonate with readers and find, your audience. And like you said with my bio, right, it's all about connecting authors and readers. And like, that's what I want to see. I want to see authors find their readers.
And it's
Yeah.
always so cyclical, like what is trendy, like it is gonna come back around. So if you try something else, like you can still
Yeah.
probably in a couple of years market that other book that you're not as focused on, So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like, you're totally abandoning that book and you'll never touch it, or like that
No.
genre and you never go back to it. It's more you're not going to let the fact that that's not selling stop you from doing something else. Um, and like you said, if I then see in 5 years, like, oh, my sales on that series that I haven't really done anything on are picking up again, like that could be a sign like, hey, the market's now interested in this. And now I want to do a little bit more in that world again.
Yeah. We have a question here about do you have any tips on finishing a first draft for like a new writer? Like what would you advise here?
So, I mean, it's one of those things where like you kind of have to just do it. But I will say one of the things that like I always advise authors is if it's stressful for you to set like a word count that you have to hit every day, is to use time instead and say like I'm going to spend an hour in the manuscript. So that might mean that you sit there and write nothing, but you dedicated an hour to try to write something. Um, and I also think it's about looking at what schedule makes sense. Like some people need to be writing every single day. And for other people, they need more time in between to be thinking about the story. So that's another thing to consider is like what schedule makes sense. So you might be like, I have a full-time job. I can't sit down for an hour every day. So it might be like, that's okay. I'm going to spend, my lunch break thinking about the story. And then I'm going to spend 30 minutes when I get home writing whatever I can get out. And that's it. Right. So all of that will be progress towards finishing the manuscript.
Yeah, I know. I think
Yeah.
Becca Syme talks about that as well, about like the time that we don't take into account the thinking time or like the
Yeah.
coming up with the story, but that's all work that you're doing towards your story.
Yeah. And it depends on the person. Like there are some people that need to be writing and discover the story as they write, and other people that need to be thinking about it and then write it when it's almost done in their head. And that's, yeah, Becca Syme with her strengths. Coaching is really great. Like she coaches me as well. And that's how like I know, hey, I'm really good at this stuff because that's what my strengths are. And I don't try to make it something that I'm not, which is very freeing.
So do you have so I know we talked about like the different like types of authors you work with. So I'm wondering if you have tips for authors that are planning a new release, but I'd like you to maybe answer like a first book ever versus like a new release. Maybe we can kind of look at both scenarios. So what would be your
Yeah.
advice on like your very first book versus your latest release?
Yeah. So for like I think one thing is I always look at like we don't want to be stressed about the fact that we're releasing something when we're indie publishing, right? Because in traditional publishing, it was really important to get pre-orders and that first week of sales because that determined if the publisher was going to put money behind it or not, and if you get a deal or not. As an indie author, like that doesn't matter to you. You could have a release totally flop and still write another book. So first, I think like for both scenarios, I like to like take the pressure off of it, which I think could help, because sometimes people get like really stressed about like, well, it has to release on this day and I have to do everything on this day. And I'm like, you don't though. It's okay. So for like a brand new author, right? Usually they're the ones that are the most nervous about it. And I'm like, we want to focus on the things that you already have access to. So that is the people you already know, your friends and family. And yes, I know it can be hard to ask them. I'm currently in the process of publishing my first poetry book, and it's nerve-wracking, but I am going to be putting it out to my friends and family because I know that they are more likely to want to support me because they know me and love me. And that's going to help, because getting over like doing it that first time will then make it easier as it goes on. So I'd say that's like the biggest step for the new author, is to look at like, who do you already have that you know? And that might be that, you know, like, hey, well, I know my friend Laura really likes cozy mysteries, and she's an author who has a newsletter list. So like, I'm going to ask her, would she share about my new book that I'm writing? Because we've been friends, right? I mean, even if she says no, like at least I tried. And then for the established author who's doing, has been doing releases for a while, I think it's, if you want to have your newsletter go out, lately I'm seeing a lot more authors do like previews of their book leading up to it, and doing different things that are not just like, hey, the book's coming out, here's the description, here are the buy links. It'll be like, hey, I did a, I don't know if you've ever seen those posts, but they're like, this is the movie told in emojis. So like authors will like do that, which is really fun when it's like a mystery book, because it's like, oh, like that makes me think and wonder what's going to happen. Or if it has to do with a different travel like area, it could be like, here's a photo tour of the place we're going to go see.
I love
romance
those reader. Or
yeah,
even
like
the
romance
tropes like broken down or something.
Yep.
That's a good one
Yep.
too.
So that's a good one, especially for romance. I've also seen it where like they do like, if I had to pick, like who would be the actor and actresses in the movie, like here are the pictures. Because I mean, it's romance, right? Like we like to see some hot, sexy men. So it's kind of like leaning more into telling stories as a way to get people excited about the release. So like, I love to have a book on pre-order and then be doing that kind of thing. I like to focus on newsletters most versus social media. But if you're doing social media, that's also a good place to be able to reuse that content. And then looking at ways that you can connect with your audience that might be different. So that might be, I'm going to have a live chat on launch day so we can all celebrate together. I have a review team, so they're going to get the book early to be able to leave reviews to help other readers like see if it's something that they're going to be interested in. So a lot of it is planning. It's like writing down the list, because I find, and especially for me, like working with different authors, I could have 3 releases on one day. So having separate lists for each person makes sure that nothing gets missed. Because I think that's like, sometimes authors are like, well, I've done this, I know what I'm doing. And it's not that they don't know what they're doing, but it can be easy for our brain to think we already did a thing, but you actually did it for the last book, not for this book. So like, I like to have like checklists to make sure I actually did it for this book. Or if you're doing like, I have some authors that write different pen names, so they're releasing 2 separate books in different pen names. So that's another area where it's easy to like drop the ball in something. Because like Kobo is a great example. Like we can email you to let you know we have a new release coming. That can be really easy to forget to do until it's way too late for you guys to really have time to do anything around that release. So yeah, I'm big on checklists. I use I give one away in my newsletter list, but I also, like for my authors, we use ClickUp. So I have a release ClickUp list that's different for the audiobooks versus translations versus new books. Yeah, that was kind of a long rambling answer. Hope that helped.
No, that's great. Love it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, lists is a good idea, especially giving one away in your newsletter. That's a good resource for authors for sure.
Yeah.
If you're looking at a more established author and assisting them, how would you kind of change what you assist with for someone who has already written maybe like 5, 10, 20 books versus someone who's just starting out?
Yeah. So usually when they're more established, more of what I'm doing is usually I still end up with the newsletter stuff. That tends to be where people like to drop me, which is fine. I love newsletters. But usually they're more comfortable in their writing. So it's less me having to give them ideas about like what to write for the newsletters and more me just being like, all right, we're in 3 different newsletter swaps. So I need to make sure we're keeping on top of it. So part of the difference is really just scale. Like we're going to be releasing 5 books this year instead of releasing 1 book a year. But the other part of it is looking at different things that we can do that are outside of the standard. I'm just publishing an ebook and a print book. So that might be like, okay, we're going to add doing hardcovers. We're going to add doing large print editions. We're going to start looking at translations. So like I might have an author who's like, here's the translator, and you're going to be the one communicating with them, right, about all the contracts and stuff. Or it could be, again, I said the biggest thing this year I'm seeing is direct sales and Kickstarter. So I have authors that are like, hey, help me put together this Kickstarter, like figure out what tiers make sense, what items, do the research on pricing. So it gets to be like more of the extra stuff. We talked about merch earlier. So it might be like, hey, come up with some ideas of really cool merch and get those put together and on our website, which I enjoy. I enjoy that challenge of like getting to do new stuff that's not just, I guess, the basic publishing.
Yeah, my favorite thing about going to events is checking out the swag. Like it's amazing,
So
the
much
different types
creative
of stuff.
merch, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah,
at
I
the
actually,
conferences.
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm a big fan because I've seen a lot of also like swag that's not great. And you can see that at conferences too, like the stuff that gets left on the tables.
Mhm.
And actually I have a cabinet in here and I keep like swag that's really cool. There's like one author who had a book called Permission to Screw Up, and she ran a cleaning company. So it talks about like her starting that. So for her swag, she has this sponge that has like the information about the book and it's flat. And then if you add it to water, it actually becomes a full sponge. But
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
that's really cool. And it ties into her background. And if you don't put it in water, it makes a really good bookmark, but more of a unique one. And like the other author, my first author that I was talking about, they had a really unique logo for the series. So that made a really good swag item because it stood alone. Like if someone didn't know the series, they would just be like, oh, that's a really cool design. But if you did know the series, right, you'd be like, oh, I know what that's about. I love quotes from books as swag because that can be a good conversation starter. So I usually tend to just stray away from like just having the author's name or just having the book cover plastered on something
Mhm.
and look at like what's something that's actually from the book that will get people talking about it.
Love that. Those are all great ideas.
Yeah.
Tony has a great question here that I'm going to pop up. So what's the number one thing that separates your financially successful clients from your clients that are struggling? I mean, I'm sure there isn't one thing, but I wonder if there's something that jumps out to you.
Yeah. So I think, I guess they're different things. So I think the ones that are doing the best usually are the ones who have really found their audience. So they're writing in the genre that the market is interested in, and they've continued to grow that. So like they found an audience who liked their first book, and then they kept building and giving the readers not the same thing, but the same type of thing. So they didn't go from like, well, I'm giving you this kind of like cozy romance feel to now I'm writing horror, right? Like, so they're meeting the promise they've given to their readers. Part of it is pure luck. It's that they wrote something that connected with an audience versus an author tried something that just didn't resonate. A part of it is that ability to switch gears. So maybe they wrote a series that didn't do quite as well. And instead of letting that like stop them and put a lot of money into marketing it, they're like, that's okay. On to the next book. And I learned from it. So treating every book like a learning experience. And usually it is like the authors that are doing really well know the genre they're writing in. It's like I've had authors who like started in romance and found like that wasn't working for them, even though romance is, as we know, hugely popular. And like now they write cozy mystery. So part of it is also like finding your writer voice. Because like I said, if you're not enjoying it or it's just not where you're meant to be in writing, it does kind of reflect in the sales. So yeah, there's different elements there.
We've had a couple of questions pop up. You've mentioned it a couple times now, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what authors are doing on Kickstarter or what you're seeing as a kind of current trend.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm seeing just tons of Kickstarters, and it really there's such like a wide variety depending on what you want to do with Kickstarter. So sometimes authors are using Kickstarters to be able to get funds to do an audiobook for their book.
Interesting.
And that's a great way to be able to say like, okay, now I'm going to have the funds, so I'm not putting out thousands of dollars myself with no pre-orders. Like essentially, it's kind of a way of doing pre-orders. I see a lot of authors doing special editions. This is really good for like YA in general, but even in like romance and things. Because you'll see there's also like a lot of companies that do book boxes who are doing like special editions. So you're tapping into a different type of readership. So I see like a lot of indie authors focus on ebooks, right? Because that's a huge part of their market. But I don't read ebooks. I love ebooks. I think they're a good thing that we have, but I like to physically have a book in my hand. And I like to collect books. So I have over 1,000 books in my personal library.
Wow.
And my favorite books are the ones that are super special. So they'll have sprayed edges, they'll have different art underneath, they'll have a jacket. They might have extra content that's only included in the print version of the book. So Kickstarter is a great way for indie authors to be able to do that like a traditional publisher to be able to do, because it gives you the funds to then be able to go to an offset printer and print 2,000 copies of this special edition and make each unit cheaper. And sometimes people are still using print on demand for these copies and just doing like Ingram will let you do a different, so like I have Becca's book here. So this is called the case laminate cover. So Ingram will let you do a different case laminate and then do a jacket over it. And those could be two separate things.
Just also have it here.
Yeah, I keep all of them right on my desk. But I've seen that, like Elise Kova is a great example of an author who uses that feature on Ingram. So all of her books have beautiful designs on the case jacket. And then the cover is, like the ebook cover. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I personally love Kickstarter. I love backing books on Kickstarter because, like I said, I love to collect special editions of books. So it hits a different audience. So someone who's not going to be super excited about your ebook launch, but like I've spent hundreds of dollars on copies on Kickstarter. I think I just backed one for like $150, and I was like, 3 books, it's worth it.
Nice. So do you think, another question here from Richard, that a writer starting out would go for Kickstarter? Just, I guess, basically is, I guess these are questions that they could ask an assistant like you, like your opinion on Kickstarter, or is there places where they can go for more information?
Yeah. So it's good to mention, right? Like these are the kind of things that I help authors with during consultations.
Nice.
So I can also like do physical work on a consultation. Like I've had someone who was like, I'm really struggling with MailerLite. I don't know how to get these things to work. Can you show me? And then we record the session so they can go back to it. But a lot of like my clarity sessions are, I have a lot of questions like this, and I just need someone who knows what they're doing to help me navigate, because I'm going to spend hours trying to figure this out for myself. So when it comes to a new author doing Kickstarter, it also, that again, will super depend on the situation. So like I've had authors who are coming from a nonfiction area, right? Like they're a business owner and they already have an established audience. So for them, a Kickstarter might make sense to start off with because they already have a built-in audience. Whereas someone who's brand new, who has no mailing list, like they might struggle with a Kickstarter. It still could be an interesting experiment to try if like that's something that they find really fascinating. But it's not something I would go and say, like, every author needs to do Kickstarter. No, you don't. But again, it's also like what you enjoy. So like if you look at Kickstarter and you start to like put together a campaign and it makes you want to cry, maybe not.
Nice. So you've been working in this industry for so long now. We're talking about Kickstarter as like a change that has happened. But what are the other changes over the years that you've seen? And do you have any sort of future vision about where the industry is going?
Yeah. So what I have seen is definitely like, and that's this, I'm totally taking this from Becca Syme because she mentioned, like, said it probably the best. We had like a gold rush in indie publishing that happened. So like when I came in, I was in that gold rush time. So it used to be that you could publish 3 books with good covers and have a good story, good editing, and be making really good money. And that's not true anymore. So like what's changed, and like it sounds bad that that's not the case, but also like what's changed is now we have so many more tools to make good books, and that wasn't the case 12 years ago. So like that's kind of the trade-off, is like now it's easier to publish really good stuff, but now that means you have to stick out and find your audience. Just publishing a book is no longer good enough to get that audience. So that's probably the biggest change. It's also why I'm really big on, and like Becca is also really big on, like quitting things that are not serving your business, because we don't have that ability to do every single thing that has come up, and not all of it is going to be helpful where we are in the publishing journey. So that's probably the hugest thing I've seen is, and that's not to say like I have a new author who's doing well, and she only started publishing 2 years ago, 1 year ago. So it's also like not all of my authors who are doing well have been publishing since I started. So that's another thing. It's like you can still be successful in this new age of publishing. It's just going to be a different way about finding that success. And again, it all depends on like, are you writing books that the market currently wants? And then are you good at retaining the readers once you have them? So, and then like we said earlier, like I've seen changes, like it used to be really popular to do online blog tours. And then you would have like being able to do a 99-cent promotion on your book or doing a free promotion on your book could then lead to a lot of sales. And while I still like doing free first in series, it's not the same. It's just not the same, I guess. Like it can still help overall to have the first book in your series be free, and then you have 5 books after that, and you can start bringing your readers into the series. But it's not quite the same of like, I got my first book bub, but my book's number 1 on the charts, and then when it comes back to paid, it's still number 1 on the charts. Like that just doesn't happen. So that's also the thing, is like you might also find like old advice about doing these things that no longer work because the systems have changed. So yeah, it's been a lot of change.
I like that you've said that you're finding newer authors that are like having the success though, because I do think that sometimes there's a misconception that like people have missed the boat on indie publishing, and that just isn't the case. It's like you said, it's just evolved.
Yeah, and it's also about like knowing if you're just starting, it's unlikely you're going to magically start making 6 figures with only 1 book out, right? That'd be what we call a unicorn case. Doesn't mean you can't still be successful in making back what you're earning, but it's also why I like to talk with authors and be like, what do you actually want from this? Not what everyone says you should want, but what do you want from this? And I'm doing that to myself too, as I look at like publishing this poetry book. I'm like, one, poetry is a whole other ball game from regular books. It's very weird. And most of the people that like are successful in poetry, they go and they do poetry nights where they're speaking their poetry. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I didn't write this poetry even to publish it. It was things that I wrote over many years when the words came to me. But my friends were like, you need to publish it. So my goal is just like, I want to make my first sale. I want to sell to someone that I don't know at all. I would love to make back the money I've spent on the cover and the editing. And like, if I can do all of those things, that'll be a success in my book. But it's not going to make me enough money to quit my day job. And that's okay. That doesn't mean it's not successful.
I know Terrence, who is the coordinator with KWL, who is watching this, is very interested in kind of indie publishing poetry and stuff like that. So we might, I might get you guys to connect afterwards, because we'd love to hear your experience about publishing a poetry book, because it is so interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I've been publishing now for over 12 years, and poetry is a whole other world. So like I just
Totally.
did a contest for my cover design, which I would never do if it was a fiction book or a regular nonfiction book, because I'd say you want to look at what's in your genre, right? And find a designer who knows that genre. Poetry covers are all over the globe. There's no set standard, which makes it very frustrating. But it's also why, right, like when I talk about authors who have books that are maybe mixed genre, right, it's going to be a harder sell. So I look at poetry the same way. It's going to be harder to sell because it is one of those areas that is, there's not necessarily this wide market. Like, even if you like poetry, you might not like my poetry. So expectation setting is huge for success in author businesses.
Speaking of publishing trends, do you have a lot of authors now who are asking you, like, how can I go viral on TikTok?
Sometimes. And I usually always say, like, it's better not to try to do those things. Right? It's a lot of work to be a creator on TikTok.
Yes.
And that's the thing, like the same thing with Instagram. I'm like, it's a lot of work to take really gorgeous images, and you can't put in half the effort and just like expect it to magically happen. So one, I think like it has to be, do you have natural talent for it? So if you're naturally like you love doing video, like TikTok might be a wonderful thing. Like I don't want to discourage you from doing it. But I have people that are like, I hate being on video. And then I'm like, why are you trying to do TikTok? It's about video. Like what's something that you're actually passionate about, and let's pursue that. So right, like we talked about Becca Syme, and she coaches strength. So I look at it like that. We want to figure out what is your thing, what are you passionate about, and then do things there, because one, it'll be easier to maintain over a long period of time, and it's more likely to bring you success than trying to force something, because people are really good at reading if you're forcing it.
Totally.
So
Authenticity on social is, I think that's kind of key to at least attempt to be authentic with what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's the
They
same thing when
know,
it
they
comes to
know
like,
otherwise.
newsletters too.
Yeah, exactly.
And like I try to encourage authors, like newsletters don't have to be newsletters. It can just be you talking to your reader. So it's trying to figure out like, well, who is that ideal reader for you, and just have a conversation with them, because then it becomes fun. It's like, oh, well, we're talking about the favorite TV shows we're watching, or we're talking about our favorite tropes. And like, I'm getting invigorated to write books because we're talking about the stuff that's making me excited. So like, that's what I want to see. Like, I don't want these things to be a chore. I mean, obviously, not everything you do is going to be fun. I don't think any of us like doing taxes, but you want to try to have the most fun while you're doing this stuff, because that's what makes this job so wonderful.
And one last question, because we've taken up a lot of your time now. How can authors who are interested in working with you get in touch with you?
So you can find me at my website, katetilton.com. And for anyone who's watching this, I'm going to give $50 off consultations if you mention Kate Loves Kobo in your email. So you can go ahead and book it, and then respond to the email and say, Kate Loves Kobo, please give me the $50 off. And I'll do that. I've never done a discount before, but I think with where things are right now with inflation and stuff, I thought it'd be a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. That's really generous.
Yeah.
And we'll share links to everything in the comments for sure.
Yeah, but definitely the website. You can find the service page. There's 3 different options for consultations. Don't stress about which one you're picking, because even if you pick one that's not the right fit, it's fine. We'll work that out when we meet.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for your time. This has been so interesting, and thanks for all of the questions, everyone. I think I feel like all successful authors need a really strong assistant behind them. So I really appreciate you giving us these insights and taking the time to chat with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I always love these conversations.
Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Well, and yeah, we'll be back next month. Well, we'll see you guys all soon. So thank you.